Mark Lloyd. If you're not familiar with him, he's known as the diversity czar in the FCC. This is the same man who was out talking about how wonderful Hugo Chavez is in his great revolution in Venezuela. The revolution where he basically took control of the majority of TV and radio stations in his country to squelch an opinion against him. An opinion against him. Does this sound familiar to anybody? What I found most telling about the bill is that suddenly the word diversity, which had never been there before, is now in this bill. In addition to that, 9 times the term discrimination has been used, and 9 times the word unlawful content. In addition to that, the ability for anybody to go ahead and file a claim with the FCC against your internet service provider because it's a little bit slow for me and it's better for my neighbor, or the station that I'm trying to tune into online is better over here than it is over there. It's not truly neutral. On the surface, this sounds great, but understand that on a monthly basis, the FCC will then turn around and impose files on the telecommunication companies and then award that money back to the person who complains. Imagine for a second a liberal blogger, or a million of them, all complaining at the same time. Does anybody else see the same model of redistribution of wealth we've heard before? The sad part is while that's going on, your internet connectivity will continue to be diminished and reduced so that one day you won't be able to pull down that podcast of Rush or listen to that streaming media of Matt Patrick on HLO because it's become so slow. This will be happening at the same time as the FCC continues to push down the road of closing down the radio stations that we all listen to on a daily basis, taking away simultaneously the 2 areas where some people think that there isn't balance because the real America is actually paying attention to them. Now, I know all of this sounds kind of conspiratorial. I've read thousands of pages of FCC reports, and I'm not just going to quote from the bill. But instead, I'm going to let Mark Lloyd's words speak for himself. See, in 2008, he wrote a piece that was called Net Neutrality is the New Civil Rights Issue. He said, and I quote, "Communities of color and underrepresented groups have long fought for a more diverse and inclusive media system. Discrimination and segregation prevented people of color from obtaining radio and TV licenses. When these mediums were created during the 1970s, cable promised to provide an alternative to TV traditional communications, and yet again they did not. Yet many of those same companies are now ready to prevent internet users, including people of color and minority, from accessing diverse online content of their choice." Mr. Lloyd's interpretation of the internet could be no further from the truth. I think everybody knows here that really, whatever you want, good or bad, you can find it out online. Unfortunately, his false use of diversity and discrimination are now poised to work in conjunction with the government to begin to seize the property of telecommunications companies and take over that network. The FCC's reports indicate that every country in the world, except for the United States, now has government ownership of the network of the internet. Of course, they fail to mention countries like China or countries like Iran. I think this summer we all found out what happened when government controlled their internet system. The sad part of it all is that in addition to taking over these private companies and taking control of it, there's a far worse thing that's going to happen here, and that's the chilling of the voice of the American people. Literally taking away from us the last best venue of our freedom of speech. And this call is being done with such famous groups as ACORN and SEIU and thousands of smaller organizations that are continuing to get on the bandwagon. The day before the hearing on Thursday, on Wednesday, the chairman of the FCC received a formal letter from 40 of these groups. I'll read just one of the quotes so it doesn't stir your blood as much as mine. "The decisions made by the FCC will determine whether our communication system can be used to champion civil rights, to advance economic equality, democratic participation, and self-determination of a people that have been long disadvantaged and discriminated against." I, for one, in my age bracket, don't even remember what the discrimination is that they were talking about. I think as a country, we've long since moved past that. The same game has been played by this administration over and over again. bill that was shoved down our throat this past spring. These same groups are involved with cap and trade, which looms in the House right now, looms in the Senate now after being approved by the House. These are the same people that were involved in the healthcare system that over 51% of this country does not want. And yet still they continue. This bill is far more sinister than most of this legislation because, first of all, it begins to take away property that the government has no right to owning, and it does actually take away our freedom of speech. In thinking about all this legislation that I've read, I kept coming across who I like to call Grandpa Reagan. I had 3 grandparents, my Grandpa Miller, my Grandpa Baker, Grandpa Ronald Reagan, who I listened to every day. Whenever I had a problem, I would listen to him on the TV to make myself feel better. I think a lot of us did through some rather difficult times. I think his reflection on government said it all. No government is voluntarily reduced by itself in size. Government programs once launched never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we will ever see here on Earth. Before I go, I would challenge every person in this room to pick up a pen, pick up a keyboard, email your congressman, email your senator, tell them to take a stand against this ridiculous form of legislation. If you want to have fun, pick up the phone and call them. Tell them first off,